Good evening, Your Majesties. Good evening, Windsor. A huge thank you to everyone for making this such a special evening. I want to say a few words about my father and why I believe this weekend is so important. But don't worry, unlike Lionel, I won't go on all night long.
All right, so buckle up because we need to talk about something pretty wild that went down recently. Or at least in this story we're diving into. Imagine this. January 29th, 2026. The heavy oak doors of Westminster swing open, and inside members of Parliament are all gathered for what would become one of the most explosive sessions in modern British history. Standing before them with a gravity that just silenced the entire chamber was Prince William. And what he was about to announce. It would send shock waves around the world and probably reduce a certain former actress turned duchess to tears thousands of miles away in Montecito. We're talking about Meghan Markle being stripped of her royal title. Yeah, you heard that right. Now, you're probably asking, how did we even get here? How did a fairy tale wedding in 2018 spiral into a constitutional crisis that eventually required Parliament itself to step in? Well, the answer really lies in a pattern of behavior so brazen, so calculated that it threatened the very foundation of the British monarchy. This isn't just some royal gossip, guys. This is the untold story of royal ambition, institutional betrayal, and the moment the crown finally said enough. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle first walked away from their royal duties back in January 2020, the world kind of saw it as a personal choice. You know, a couple seeking independence, freedom from the suffocating constraints of royal life. But was that really the whole story? Because over the years, something far more disturbing started to emerge. Their repeated use of royal styling, diplomatic privileges, and commercial leverage began to really blur the lines between living independent lives and still representing the crown. See, the exit agreements were meant to separate them from official royal duty. But then you'd have HR titles mysteriously showing up in private invitations, diplomatic paperwork, and even merchandise campaign. Harry and Meghan's actions weren't just defying expectations. They were reshaping the entire constitutional debate over what it even means to be royal in the 21st century. I mean, think about it for a second. Can you really claim independence from an institution while at the same time exploiting its symbols for personal gain? Can you reject the responsibilities but cling to the privileges? These are the questions that haunted Buckingham Palace for years. And on January 29th, 2026, those questions finally got their answer. Now, while no official act of Parliament had previously stripped Harry or Meghan of any title, sources close to government discussions indicated that legislation like the Removal of Titles Bill was under renewed consideration. This groundbreaking legislation would give either the monarch or a parliamentary committee the power to revoke royal titles from non-working royals. Harry and Meghan technically retain the Dukedom of Sussex and associated peerage titles granted by Queen Elizabeth in 2018. And this is a big but, they agreed with Buckingham Palace in January 2020 not to use his or her Royal Highness in official or commercial capacity. Reports from 2025, however, suggested the couple had occasionally used or accepted informal HR, styling in private contact. Can you imagine the audacity? Agreeing publicly to one thing while doing another behind closed doors. These tensions, they reached a boiling point in 2025. Meghan Markle's correspondence with international charities and event organizers in Nigeria revealed the usage of HR, styling in private documents. Even more concerning, several diplomatic channels, including visa authorities and government contacts, had processed Meghan's travel arrangements under the assumption that she was still a working royal figure. If they had traveled as private citizens, these protocols would not have applied. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate misrepresentation. A senior aide to Princess Anne actually released a statement in October 2025 that would become a rallying cry for reform. She said, "This is not about protocol. It's about principle, integrity, and the line between public service and personal gain." There can be no gray zone. You are either representing the crown with full transparency or you are not. Princess, and known for her no-nonsense approach, reportedly demanded an internal audit of all Sussex-linked philanthropic and commercial venture. The objective was clear: identify every instance where royal affiliation may have been leveraged for financial gain or diplomatic privilege. And that, my friends, is where things really started to unravel for Harry and Meghan. The investigation kicked off, and they looked into three main things. First up, event and speech engagements. What they found was pretty telling. At least 14 invitations sent to Meghan and Harry had explicitly used their royal titles in the greetings or event material. This immediately raised a red flag because it made it seem like the hosts were being misled, thinking they were getting official royal representation when, according to the agreements, they weren't. Then there was the whole visa and travel documentation mess, especially around that Nigeria visit. Nigerian immigration officials confirmed that Harry and Meghan had entered the country using diplomatic-level visa. These are typically reserved for official representatives of a sovereign government. But here's the bombshell. These visas were actually facilitated by an Archewell executive who used royal letterhead from a 2020 event. An Archewell employee using royal letterhead to secure diplomatic privileges for what was essentially a private trip. That's not a misunderstanding, guys. That's deliberate misrepresentation. The letter even cited things like ongoing crown-adjacent projects, phrases clearly designed to blur the lines between Archewell's private initiatives and actual royal statecraft. The UK Home Office took this very seriously, noting that royal prestige was weaponized to access privileges intended for sovereign diplomacy. The third area of the audit was charitable disbursements. Archewell's grant-making records filed in both the US and UK just weren't uniform. Several beneficiaries had listed Archewell's founders as Duke and Duchess in their IRS and HMRC filings, which, let me tell you, triggered some serious red flags with Regal. So, Princess, and being the no-nonsense royal she is, drew a very clear line. She basically said, look, no one, no matter how famous or how hurt they might feel, has the right to act in a way that confuses the British people about who speaks for the crown. She spent decades as one of the hardest-working royals, doing hundreds of engagements annually with zero fanfare. She doesn't do interviews, doesn't write memoirs, doesn't sell her story. She just serves. So when someone like Princess and speaks and breaks her usual silence to make a public statement, the institution doesn't just listen, it acts. At the same time, Prince William started quietly consulting with legal advisors and constitutional experts. He was looking into invoking letters patent to limit the public usage of HR titles and clarify royal boundary. He reportedly urged King Charles to get the necessary framework ready. Then came the unprecedented joint statement. On the morning of January 23, 2026, Buckingham Palace released a statement unlike any in recent royal history. It was signed jointly by Princess and Prince William. It was measured but unmistakably firm. This wasn't about personal grievance. She doesn't do interviews, doesn't write memoirs, doesn't sell her story. She just serves. So when someone like Princess and speaks and breaks her usual silence to make a public statement, the institution doesn't just listen, it acts. At the same time, Prince William started quietly consulting with legal advisors and constitutional experts. He was looking into invoking letters patent to limit the public usage of HR titles and clarify royal boundary. He reportedly urged King Charles to get the necessary framework ready. Then came the unprecedented joint statement. On the morning of January 23, 2026, Buckingham Palace released a statement unlike any in recent royal history. It was signed jointly by Princess and Prince William. It was measured but unmistakably firm. This wasn't about personal grievance. This was about institutional survival. It was the first time in 2 generations that senior royals outside the reigning monarch publicly addressed a breach of trust from within the family. This was about institutional survival. It was the first time in 2 generations that senior royals outside the reigning monarch publicly addressed a breach of trust from within the family. The statement outlined 5 key declarations. 1. The royal household does not recognize Archewell as a royal-endorsed charitable entity. 2. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are no longer permitted to represent or speak on behalf of any Commonwealth-affiliated initiative. 3. A formal request was submitted to King Charles to initiate the process of title review under the Royal Marriages Act and Letters Patent. 4. The royal family's official charitable representation would be consolidated under a new entity, the Crown Service Foundation, chaired jointly by Princess Catherine and Princess Anne. 5. An audit recommendation was passed to UK regulators and US partners regarding Archewell's public disclosures, foreign donations, and use of HR styling. Can you even imagine receiving that statement if you were Harry and Meghan? The institution you'd spent years criticizing was now systematically dismantling your entire public identity. The public reaction, it erupted. Royal correspondents flooded the airway. Robert Hardman, one of the UK's leading royal historians, noted that this wasn't a personal attack. This was a public health warning about confusion, misrepresentation, and the misuse of royal capital in a globalized, media-saturated era. Social media absolutely exploded. Hashtags like Protect the Crown and Royal Line Drawn started trending with public sentiment overwhelmingly in favor of the clarification. British veterans groups who had once supported Harry's Invictus Games released a polite but firm message backing the palace's move. They said, "Service and sacrifice must never be confused with celebrity." A petition calling for the full revocation of the Sussex titles reached over 300,000 signatures in just 48 hours. Harry and Meghan's response silent. For 2 full days, nothing. Then late in the evening of January 25th, Archewell quietly updated the BIOS on its website. The phrase members of the British royal family was removed. So was the line about supporting the Commonwealth. No apology, no clarification, just digital edits made in silence. But behind the scenes, the fallout was catastrophic. So, after Harry and Meghan just quietly updated their website, taking down those royal family mentions, the consequences, guys, were immediate and pretty harsh. Over at Netflix, executives started reviewing all their Sussex content. That podcast episode, the one meant to highlight Meghan's Nigeria trip, yeah, that got delayed indefinitely. And it wasn't only Netflix. Several big PR firms began quietly distancing themselves from Archewell's brand. It's like when the palace draws a line, everyone else suddenly gets very careful about where they stand. Legal experts quickly pointed out that Archewell's tax filings both in the US and the UK were now under a microscope. A former Charity Commission advisor basically said once you lose that presumption of transparency, donors bail, and they bail fat. This was a huge blow because, let's be real, the royal connection was their main thing. Without that, what do they actually have? Just a personal story that honestly has been told too many times and believed less and less. That's got to sting, right? Harry, he went from being all confident to, well, pretty desperate. He led all his upcoming press appearances, and he actually told his legal team to ask for a confidential mediation session with the Privy Council. The prince, who seemed so sure about his California life, so certain of his choices, was suddenly scrambling for a way back in. And Meghan, she went completely silent. Her official Instagram account, not a single post since January 29th. Her team is saying she's reevaluating forward-facing roles, which, let's be honest, is just corporate speak for. She's waiting for this whole thing to blow over. Hollywood, despite all its talk about artistic freedom, is super risk-averse when it comes to legal trouble and brand damage. So, major production partners like Netflix and Spotify, they put all their Sussex projects on hold, waiting for legal clearance from Archewell. Spotify even announced that all the intellectual property for their podcast had reverted back to them. Meghan's big voice in the cultural conversation, it was over. It got even worse for Harry. U.S. immigration authorities confirmed they were re-evaluating his green card status. This was due to questions about financial disclosures and tax residency issues connected to Archewell. So his right to even stay in America was suddenly up in the air in Meghan's team. They formally withdrew their trademark application for Archewell Royal. The very name they'd fought to protect was now a liability. Sources close to Meghan say she's devastated, apparently in tears, and just struggling to process the finality of it all. The woman who once graced Vogue covers, who married into the most famous family in the world, who thought she could rewrite the rules of monarchy, is now silent in a Montecito mansion. Harry, meanwhile, is stuck with an impossible choice: his wife or his family, his California life or his British heritage, his commercial ventures or his royal legacy. Honestly, he might have already lost both. This whole situation was never about revenge. It was about protecting centuries of service-based legacy from modern manipulation. It was about safeguarding an institution that has survived far bigger threats than one wayward prince and his ambitious wife, Princess, and she really nailed it, saying, "If we're to be called royals, let it be for the duty we perform, not the titles we claim. Let it be for how we serve, not how we sell." And that, guys, is how a chapter ended. Not with a shouting match, but with a strategic, irreversible separation. The crown stood strong because it was willing to defend its core principle. The pretenders, they fell. Victims of their own